It's the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter here with Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we're here talking to you guys during the bye week. But it's time to take a second to look back and reflect what's been the most surprising thing and the least surprising thing about the Steelers season. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the rest of the AFC North this weekend right here in the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. And welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast, brought to you from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We welcome you to the show. It's the Friday edition. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko, and we're here breaking things down on the bye week. Normally, Brian, you'd be getting ready to jet set somewhere, or you'd be getting ready to set up at Acrisure Stadium. But this week, it's neither. You get a bit of a reprieve. As always, this show is brought to you by the Acrisure Fan Advantage, the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. Using augmented reality, you can get an exclusive pregame breakdown from a Steelers expert standing in your living room. Get the latest insights on starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage. No apps or downloads, just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage and get a real edge on this week's action. Brian, what do you do during the bye week?
Well, Chris, I think I'm going to not open up my laptop for a while, not file any stories, not really worry about checking Twitter around the clock, and if possible, try not to think about the 2-6 Pittsburgh Steelers. I'll still probably watch plenty of football this weekend between college games on Saturday and the NFL games on Sunday. Still care about my fantasy teams, but
there you go.
Yeah, but it'll be nice just being able to relax and do it as opposed to being on edge in a press box while I do it.
Absolutely. And having to deal with people tweet the entire game about, why this guy sucks, that guy sucks. You can watch other fan bases do that to other cities' reporters. But before we talk more about that, Brian, and with the bye week, let's take a second look back at the season so far. We're basically at the half point, which is It's nice when the bye week is a half point, not a quarter point or a 3/4 points of the season.
The old schedule, it would be the exact halfway mark.
Yeah. This would be of the old 16 game schedule, but 8 games in, they're 2-6. What is the most surprising part of this season to you so far that has caught you off guard if you were sitting back in August and someone said, "Hey, this is going to happen," you'd be like, "Whoa."
I'd say the defensive issues overall. I mean, certainly losing TJ Watt has not helped, and it's hurt a lot, but even beyond just the lack of pressure, I thought they were going to be one of the best units in the league this year, Chris, and by pretty much every statistical measure, they've been one of the worst. So it's more than just losing one guy to me. I mean, you could predict that the sack numbers would dip, the pressure numbers would dip, but the secondary has not been what I thought it would be. I mean, even Minkah Fitzpatrick, he got off to the start that pretty much everybody has come to expect from him, and it was a bounce back that he needed, frankly, after a down 2021. But he hasn't played as well of late. So it's been surprising to me that group hasn't gelled with all of the experience, the top end talent that they've got at every level. So it's been a big disappointment for me. It's been better than the offense, but it's all relative. We knew that the defense was going to be the heart and soul of this team and that they'd have to be graded on a curve. And right now the grades aren't very good through 8 weeks.
No, they're not. I mean, if you look at right now, they're the second worst passing defense, the second worst rushing defense, and they rank somewhere in the 20s when it comes to points allowed right now. And that's I think that's definitely a turning point for the season is when this defense was supposed to help people out. But I do look at this, and we'll get to this later, with one of my other points here. But I think a lot of that plays into TJ Watt. I mean, even like last year, the defense was what carried them to the playoffs. But they couldn't do that without TJ Watt on the field. And the one game that he was on the field, they looked like one of the best defenses in the NFL when they forced 5 turnovers. Now the question will be, can they look like that again when he's back on the field this year? because
Yeah, I mean
presumably,
that's what I guess I factor into it too. Is I thought some new role players such as Larry Ogunjobi,
mhm,
Levi Wallace. I mean, he's not new, but Akella Witherspoon, I thought getting re-signed. I thought those players would make more of an impact. And Ogunjobi has shown flashes. He's
you're
been
right.
banged up. Witherspoon just, he's been injured, but even when healthy, has been a weakness rather than a strength. So
Mhm.
that to me has been kind of the most disappointing and surprising thing about the defense. Not even necessarily, and even somebody that they acquired just before the season, Malik Reed. I thought he would be able to step in and provide more punch in place of T.J. Watt, whether it was Watt going down with an injury or even just as the third rotational rusher. And to that point, maybe he's out of his depth a little bit being a starter, but he hasn't provided much.
He hasn't, and I mean he got his first sack of the season against the Eagles, and it was just like when he did that, I was like, are we seeing things here? What's going on with that? But all in all, I'm right with you there. If I was to say my most surprising thing, I'd go with Kenny Pickett starting as early as he did. I was of the legitimate belief because I'm one that thinks the Steelers they take their time with everything. Like everyone
Sure.
wants them to fire Matt Canada now. I fully believe they will fire Matt Canada after this season's over. I just don't think it happens in the middle of the season. But like with Kenny Pickett, I thought that if he was going to play this year, it was going to happen after the bye week, and that would be their chance to kind of work him in for 2 weeks and then let him start against a Saints team that is mediocre to below average this year, instead of throwing him in the gauntlet when he had to get his first start in the NFL against the Bills and then play the Eagles, the Buccaneers. I mean, he has played three of the top 10 offenses in the NFL in his first 4 or 5 starts.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a lot to keep pace with.
that's a lot to keep pace with, especially while you're adjusting to a league that is so much faster than what you're used to. I don't care what college you went to.
And those defenses haven't been too shabby either.
They haven't been. I mean, when you look at how those defenses stack up, just in points scored, the Bills are the number 1 defense, the Eagles are the number 4 defense, and the Buccaneers are the number 6 defense. Those are 3 of them right there. They've also played the Jets where he first came in. The Jets are just outside the top 10. The Patriots are right below them, and so and I know that Kenny Pickett didn't play the Patriots or the Bengals, who are right below the Patriots. But I mean, the Steelers have played the toughest schedule in the NFL. If you look at strength of schedule right now, and I think that's something that's interesting when you look at and you compare it to where they might be when they're playing the 20th strongest schedule for the rest of the season when you compare it to all the other teams.
Yeah, it's another thing that it's we're going to get to it in the next segment with our least surprising takeaways from this first half. But I'm with you, Chris. I didn't expect that they would bring Kenny Pickett in this soon, especially when we saw how they were operating with him, going all the way back to OTAs when it seemed like he was the low man on the totem pole, was going to have to really scratch and claw for every rep. So once that was the approach and extended into training camp in the preseason, I figured, yeah, there's no way that he's going to get in there before the bye. And here we are. Mitch Trubisky was benched on a pretty short leash in the 4th week, and this season kind of took on a completely different tone and tenor than anybody really expected. But yeah, I mean, I knew that I knew they liked him, so I didn't chalk it up as my most surprising, but it's probably number 2, and it's close because I didn't see this coming before week 1.
We'll talk about our least surprising in just a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, we're going to talk to you guys about Liquid Death. If you don't know about Liquid Death, you're missing out because it's the best mountain spring water brand out there. It comes in a tall boy can, looks like a beer, like looks like you're chugging a Miller Lite. No, you're just chugging crisp, refreshing, ice cold water. Put it in your fridge, put it in a cooler. It's awesome. It's great for you. And they call it Liquid Death because it murders your thirst and it's murdering plastic pollution. Not only does it come in a very recyclable can, but also 10% of the profits of every can sold goes to fighting plastic pollution on the planet. So you're doubling being healthy for yourself and being healthy for the planet all in one purchase with a can of Liquid Death water. So go get some Liquid Death. They're at your local Target, 7-Eleven, or county fair, or find a Liquid Death retailer near you with their store located at liquiddeath.com/shore. That's liquiddeath.com/shore. We're also brought to you and sponsored by the Don't Call It a Comeback podcast. Former NFL star Ryan Shazier wants to make it something clear. When doctors told him he would never walk again after a devastating on-field injury, it wouldn't be his last play. For Ryan, miraculously walking back onto the field was his only option, because the one thing the odds don't account for is the will to overcome. Don't Call It a Comeback is a new podcast from Wondery, co-hosted by Ryan Shazier, a former Pro Bowl linebacker, along with Dave Dameshek, former Jimmy Kimmel Live writer and fantasy analyst on the NFL Network. Here's a clip that's going to get you hyped up for this show, because you guys are going to want to check it out.
The kick is on the way, and it is good. Bills have won it. What a comeback.
I know what it's like to make a comeback.
One of the great comebacks in history.
In 2017, I was a linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, where my whole life was changed in an instant.
Shazier, the middle linebacker,
Is not getting up.
I don't think anybody has seen his legs move since the hit.
They said I'll be paralyzed for the rest of my life, that I'll never walk again. But I didn't give up. I understood that was just the beginning of my comeback.
And look at you now, 5-0. You still have a better 40 time than I do.
That's not saying much, Shay.
The point here is there are comeback stories, big and small, happening all over the sports landscape every single day.
The return to glory.
LeBron James delivers on his promise to bring a championship to his beloved hometown.
From Klay Thompson to Albert Pujols to Alex Smith, the rise and fall and dramatic comeback of players and teams fuel our insatiable sports obsession.
They even make movies about it.
Yes, they do, because everyone loves a Rocky story. From Wondery, this is Don't Call It a Comeback.
Don't call it a comeback.
Hosted by me, former Pro Bowl linebacker Ryan Shazier.
And me, zero-time Pro Bowler Dave Dameshek. In each episode, we'll look at the down-and-out moments that led to the magical ones. We'll dive deep into what makes each story more incredible than the last.
Pujols sits in the air. It's deep to left. Albert Pujols has joined the 700 home run club.
Underdogs, Cinderellas, redemption stories. This is what sports are all about.
So follow Don't Call It a Comeback on Amazon Music or wherever you get your podcasts. Listen ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus and Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app.
Don't call it a comeback. I've been waiting on this moment my whole life. Can't call it a comeback.
Welcome back to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. We are of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Brian, it's kind of, I got to admit, I miss listening to Dave Dameshek talk about stuff sometimes. You know, I used to see him all the time on NFL Network. It's refreshing to hear his voice, hear that Yinzer accent come out a little bit there when he talks and the excitement he has. But it's also really
he
cool.
had me cracking up with some of those one-liners with Shazier.
He always has them. I miss his NFL where he would go over what could have happened if this point in history didn't happen. But it makes me really happy to see Ryan Shazier. I think you were there in Cincinnati the night that injury happened.
Right? No, I wasn't covering the Steelers yet, but
okay.
That's just a moment that everybody remembers. I think where you were.
Yeah.
You know, I was half watching the game. I was out to dinner with my wife somewhere in Squirrel Hill, and I mean, you don't really forget that because of how heavy and weighty that moment was when it happened. So, props to Ryan for all he's done in the media world, the business world, as he's kind of reinvented himself since officially retiring from the NFL. I think it was last year, right?
Yeah, he officially retired last year, and he's moved on. He's creating opportunities for himself. It's awesome to see that. I was there, man. And that's one of the few times in my life where I've sat there covering a football game and saying I really don't care what happens at this point in time in the game. And it was awesome to see him dance at his own wedding. It was awesome to see him walk out on the NFL draft stage. It's awesome to see him continue his career. So do check out the Don't Call It a Comeback podcast. But we got to get to our least surprising points of the Steelers season right now. Brian, you talked about the surprising point being the defense. What's something that has happened that you absolutely saw coming?
Yeah, I didn't think Mitch Trubisky was going to be NFL Comeback Player of the Year in 2022, but I figured it would be a slow start for the offense. The there were so many new pieces, so many new faces, as what happens every year at training camp and preseason. People start to buy in. They get a little overhyped about what they're seeing out there. This season it was Deontay Johnson after he signed his extension, making nice catches out in Latrobe. It was George Pickens being the star of the show. It was Chase Claypool. How are they going to stop this? And it's like, I don't know, man. There's still a lot that needs to come together here. There's still a lot that's unproven and what we don't know. And as we got further into the preseason, we saw, the O-line is far from a finished product. And with Trubisky specifically, I figured it was going to take some time to sort of knock the rust off and, settle down, settle into a new offense and new faces around him. So I'm not surprised that the offense has struggled to this point, but obviously, like we talked about before, kind of thought it would still be Trubisky scuffling rather than Kenny Pickett. So that's where I always came down. I was just looking the other day at, my notes app. I wrote down for probably a Ray Fittipaldo podcast back in the day in May after the NFL schedule came out. I wrote down, the game by game win-loss records. I had them at 4-4 at the break, so not too far off. And if a play here or a play there goes differently, that's probably what they'd be. But I was always pretty pessimistic that they'd hit the ground running on that side of the ball.
Yeah, it was tough to imagine any way that the Steelers played this season that the offense would be a catalyst for anything going on. They averaged 94.9 yards on the ground, which isn't the worst or even around the worst. I mean, it's in the bottom of the half of the league. I think it's like 20, I'd say 25th, 26th. I mean, it's not good, it's pretty bad, but it's at the same time like the Steelers were last in rushing offense not too long ago, and
some of those numbers inflated by being blown out late in games.
This is true. Some of them
run some draws and pick up some good chunks, but
right, getting those numbers. And again, it's not celebrating anything, but still, I mean, that's pretty bad. And then the passing offense, 204.1 passing yards per game, and it hovers around that same place, and that's also one that's a little more overinflated because of the garbage time passing at the end of games. But either way, the offense, I think you're absolutely right there. One thing that surprised me, though, and it kind of ties into what your original point was, what hasn't surprised me was when I came into this season, I thought the Steelers could be 4-4 going into the bye, even before we saw how the season played out. But that 4-4 was predicated on one thing happening, and that was TJ Watt not getting hurt. Because
games, yeah,
and him being able to wreck games, and him setting up other people to wreck games. Because Alex Highsmith has 6.5 sacks on the season. 3 of those sacks came when TJ Watt was on the field. And I really think that if TJ Watt was out there, he might have some more of those types of plays. And
I still think he's probably this team's breakout player at the half point.
Absolutely.
I don't know who else you'd pick for that.
Yeah, if there was a breakout player.
I mean,
you don't as much as George Pickens has been allowed to break out on this offense.
He might be the offensive MVP to this point, but
that's actually a very good point. He probably is the offensive MVP.
If the numbers aren't necessarily there, but like for people watching closely, I'd say maybe Mitch Trubisky maybe George Pickens has been the best player on this offense. I was going to say my midseason offensive MVP would be second half Mitch Trubisky.
Second half
backup Mitch Trubisky.
Backup. I mean, he got them that win against the Buccaneers.
Yeah. Backup Kenny Pickett was pretty good too.
Backup Kenny Pickett. That's the thing. It's whoever's coming off the bench. That's who the MVP is. But it doesn't surprise me because this team is everyone knows it's in a rebuild. But even in the rebuild, I think this team can be competitive and will be competitive if TJ Watt is healthy. And not against the Eagles and the Bills in those type of games, but against teams like the Patriots, the Jets, even the Browns, the Dolphins, those type of games where they were in those games late. I think those are the games where TJ Watt makes 2 or 3 plays or helps other people to make 2 or 3 plays that get them over the top in those type of games. And if he's
the Jets game, 1 strip sack is the difference. I mean,
1 strip sack.
How many times did we see that last year? Seahawks game, Bears game.
Game.
Yeah, that's what he does.
I mean, heck, the Bills game, the turnover he forced on Josh Allen. Again, I'm not saying that he would have done that this year and flipped the tides in that game, but he's that much of a difference maker, and it'll be crazy. Brian, can you win comeback player of the year if you miss half the season, then you come back and you're wrecking shop the way TJ Watt was last year?
I don't think that's generally how the award works.
I don't think so either.
But yeah, I mean, it is pretty much like he's missed basically the entire season to this point. So I guess who is going to win it around the league this year? I guess is McCaffrey. Is he in the running maybe with what he's doing these days?
Saquon Barkley?
Yeah, Saquon. Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, those are two good picks.
Yeah, they're both playing really well, and I think here's the other thing: if we see more of the Christian McCaffrey we saw last weekend, catching, throwing, and running a touchdown, I think everyone's going to be talking about him as the season rolls along. You could just say the entire New York Giants, because they have been non-existent since they got rid of Tom Coughlin. But back to the Steelers though, just I urge again. I think that this second half of the season, if TJ Watt does come back and is healthy, I think it's going to be a bit more fun than Steelers fans realize. And unless you're one of those Steelers fans that is just begging for a top 5 pick, that's just saying, you know what, I hope that they lose so that they can get that pick there. Listen, I don't think it's going to, I think you're going to see the annoying, like if you're one of those people, you're going to be really annoyed when the Steelers rip off like 4 or 5 wins in the back end of the season. And then you're sitting there in mid to late December and you're like, why does this team have an outside chance at the playoffs right now? Why are they sitting there with 6 wins? They were supposed to have 3 wins on the season so that they could go get Will Anderson or Jalen Carter or anyone at the top of this draft class.
Yeah. I mean, the Raiders are, they're probably not going to be playing for much.
Nope.
December 23rd or 24th. Yeah. Christmas Eve. Panthers, and what are they going to be competing for at that point? They've even got an interim head coach. I guess the Saints and Falcons have been a little pluckier than we thought.
I agree.
But it's the Ravens. They're still in the driver's seat for the AFC North. We're going to talk about them next, I know, because they've got a big one this weekend. And the Browns and Bengals. Round 2 with both of those teams. They've been up and down, so it could go either way, really, in all of those games that I just made in the Colts. Their next road game, they're really struggling to find an identity. So, I think it's going to be a more competitive second half of the season than it was first half for the Steelers. And one thing, I know I said the offense being disjointed was not necessarily a surprise to me, especially in the first half of the season. But I did think Najee Harris would be a little bit more productive than he's been to this point. So perhaps better days are ahead for him if that O-line can continue gelling together and doing its part. Najee does his part. That'll help out. That'll help out all the boats there on that tide.
Indeed, we'll see how that plays out. But even though it's the bye week, we still want to get some picks in because there's some AFC North football going on this weekend. We want to talk about where they are and just to look around the league. What's going on there? We'll talk about some of this weekend's games right after the break. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our sponsors. Our first sponsor here, Valley's Pool and Spa. Wouldn't it be nice if the holidays were stress-free? A hot tub, swim spa, or a sauna from Valley Pool and Spa will help you feel like it is. Relax and soak in a hot tub or a swim spa from Valley Pool and Spa before the snow flies. Refresh, and rejuvenate in a Finleo sauna that is sure to melt your stress away faster than the Frosty in Aruba. Save big now on all in-stock hot tubs, swim spas, and hot tubs by going to valleypoolspa.com. That's valleypoolspa.com. But also, we're brought to you by Yinzers in the Berg. With the Steelers campaign off and running, the Penguins are off and running. Both are struggling. But how can you help them? You can show your support and rep your black and gold no matter what's going down with the Pittsburgh Pro teams. It's easy. Just go to the Yinzers in the Berg. They have 2 legendary stores in the Strip District. You can go there, or you can visit their online store if you're not in Pittsburgh and you want to rep your teams by going to yinzerspgh.com. Yinzerspgh.com. They have all the Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. Everything you can need to root on your Pittsburgh squads. Again, check out Yinzers in the Berg, whether in the Strip District or online at yinzerspgh.com. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. Brian, let's talk about the rest of the AFC North and a little bit about the league too. We don't have to limit ourselves to just the AFC North here. The Browns are on a bye week at 3-5, a game ahead of the Steelers. The Bengals, though, they had a really bad loss to the Browns last week. They looked pathetic. They got beat worse than the Steelers got beat when they had Mitch Trubisky playing the Browns.
And now they're saying up for Monday Night Football.
They did not show up for Monday Night Football. They are now 4-4. The Bengals were supposed to be the stuff. This is their Super Bowl. They're going to get back to it and they're going to redeem themselves.
Super Bowl pick. I picked them to win the Super Bowl.
You picked them to win the. I told you it was a bad pick. They're not who they promised to be, man. I still got the Bills and the Eagles as my 2 Super Bowl teams that were going to make it this year. But the Bengals are 4-4. They're hosting the 2-6 Panthers. Now the Panthers, like you said, they don't got much to play for. They got PJ Walker in there. They're not doing too hot. If the Bengals find a way,
the Bills and the Eagles before the season.
Yes, sir.
Wow, I'm gonna have to find the evidence of the Eagles pick, Chris. That is impressive.
That was my Johnny McGonigal pick.
Can you tell me where to find that?
I have no idea where to find it. Probably on Locked On Steelers somewhere before the season started when people told me about that. But in all seriousness, if the Bengals find a way to lose to the 2-6 Panthers, there's gonna be more mayhem than what's happening with the Penguins right now with their 6-game losing streak. And because believe me, that's pretty crazy. I was at the Pete on what was it, Wednesday night when they lost to they blew that lead to the Sabres, and I was just thinking like, oh gosh, people in Pittsburgh are going to be in such a bad state for the rest of the week until somebody gets a win.
And then Pitt basketball beat Edinburgh. So
and they listen. Who thought that in the ashes of the Steelers and the Penguins both stinking this year, that Pitt basketball would be the team that rises to the occasion and carries the banner of championship success for the city of Pittsburgh? But
in exhibitions,
exhibition plays against PSAC schools, baby, that's the standard. But in all seriousness, what's your read on the Bengals and why they're struggling right now?
My read on the Bengals is that I go back to week 1. They really missed T. Higgins in the second half of that game against the Steelers. Their offense just didn't flow the same. They got on track a little bit late and made it close and still almost won it, if not for that Minkah Fitzpatrick block. But now they've got Jamar Chase down. They're missing him. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. Some would say the best, and he's not out there at the moment. So this offense is looking for answers. Everybody's asked to do more, playing out of position a little bit. And the offensive line to begin with was not what they hoped it was going to be. So they're going through it right now. It's a rough time for the Bengals. And I guess joke's on me for believing in Cincinnati, but I thought this was not the same old Bengals. This was Joe Burrow swagging it up with the best wide receiver trio and an improved offensive line with a defense that could still get the job done. And we're not seeing much of any of that.
That's my thing, is that the offensive line was a bit overrated coming into the season. PFF was ranking them 10th overall, but then when you remember that they're run by Chris Collinsworth and a bunch of Bengals fans, that's why that was happening.
And it was on belief. It was veterans coming in, but you hadn't seen them all play together. So
right. And I really think there's a chance, especially with Jamar Chase out for most likely for the next time the Steelers play them, there's a chance the Steelers sweep these guys. Like, I could totally see them because they'll be in Acrisure Stadium. The Steelers will be off the Saints game. If the defense does have back TJ Watt, I could see a similar situation where the Bengals, struggle, and the Steelers they catch a couple big plays on defense, and the offense gets like 1 or 2 drives in that game. That might be all they need. That Bengals team, I think, is frauds, but I do think they beat the Panthers this weekend. I do think they're at home. The Panthers are terrible. If they lose to the Panthers, it's a case. But do you see an upset special, or is this a they kind of hold the fort down type of weekend?
Nah, I mean, everything we just said, bashing the Bengals. It is. I mean, they were on a 2-game win streak before getting worked by the Browns. It was actually their first game all season that they either didn't win or didn't keep within 3 points. So they've still been very competitive. Other than that one, I think even with the Chase injury, they get back on track at home against a bad Panthers team. I'll go Bengals 38, Panthers 15.
There you go. I think that's a fair projection. Monday Night Football, though, Ravens at Saints. The Saints being 3-5 at home. and the Ravens 5-3. The Ravens went and got Roquan Smith next to Patrick Queen. They're ready. They're in win now mode. They're
Can
trying
Roquan play wide receiver, or what's up with that?
And they just lost Rashad Bateman for the rest of the.
Yeah.
Everyone says the Steelers are terrible at drafting and developing cornerbacks, and they aren't good at it. But I will say that Mike Hilton was their own guy that they drafted. Now he's with a different, or not the drafted. They signed him and then they developed him. I will say that Cam Sutton was a developed guy. But who do the Ravens have at wide receiver that has ever developed into anything for Lamar Jackson? It's been so bad at that position for so long.
Yeah, I can't even think of anybody. I mean, I guess they're getting some good play now out of Devin Duvernay from Texas, who they drafted a few years ago. Was mostly a returner in the early part of his career, but now he's basically their number one receiver, I guess, right? So they're going to have to retool. If any team you maybe believe in can do that on the fly, it would be the Ravens. I still think they're incredibly well coached, and they've got a quarterback who can elevate people around him in Lamar. So maybe they will figure it out, and we know they want to be a run-first team anyway. But yeah, as much as they can funnel the ball through Mark Andrews, who's also dinged up right now, that offense is really going to have to get some guys to step up. They're going to have to make the standard as the standard on offense down in Baltimore.
I think they do in this game. The Saints are not a consistent enough team. They're not as good in defense as I thought they'd be this year. I thought that would be their saving grace that kind of kept them in the ring. Now, the crazy thing is that the Saints are they're actually not as out of it as I thought. They're in second place in the NFC South because the
NFC South is bad, man. Who's in first?
The Falcons at 4-4.
There you go. That's Falcons.
Crazy. That's crazy. If you had told me that, I said you're drunk. But
especially since they went into this season being like, should we try to greatly improve our team at the most important position?
Nah.
No. Let's just see what happens.
But crazy enough, the Saints are there. I do think this is a game the Ravens win. And I think that it's Steelers fans are thinking like, well, guys, you're saying that the AFC North gets better this week. I am, but I think it's because they're both playing NFC South teams, and then this is the time to beat up on some people, and extend some things. So I got the Ravens winning. I think it's going to be not as high. I think it's going to be like 27 to like 15 or some weird score like that. I think it's a sloppy game, but Lamar Jackson pulls them through.
I'm actually going to go with the upset in this one, Chris. I'm going to say the Saints get this one done at home. Their offense is somehow, some way scoring points right now with Andy Dalton under center, obviously he knows the Ravens. He knows what's going on there. Mm-hmm. And Taysom Hill doing a bunch of gadget stuff. Alvin Kamara seems to be prime Alvin Kamara again. This guy Rashid Shaheed, who's all name teams, tearing it up. Chris Olave leads all rookie receivers in yardage, I believe. So they do still have some weapons, even with Michael Thomas being down. And I think the defense is going to hold serve. I mean, they just shut out the Raiders. They always seem to play well at home. I'll go Saints 30, Ravens 24.
Interesting. All right. We'll see how that plays out. The Bengals and the Ravens playing this weekend, wherever they're at. The Steelers will be playing the Saints next week at Acrisure Stadium.
The Saints will have that short week when they'll have 6 days to prepare, whereas the Steelers have 10 or 14 from the time that their last game was. So just if it were flipped, if it were reversed, all the Steelers fans would be like, why does the NFL always do this to us? So,
this only happens to the Steelers.
This only happens to us. But, we'll see if anybody, notices that in this case, not only are they coming off their bye, but they're getting a team on a short week.
Absolutely. We'll see how that is.
The Saints have to travel. So.
Absolutely. And the Saints have to travel up north. That'll be interesting. We'll have all the looks on that in the North Shore Drive podcast next week. Ray Fittipaldi will be back on the show Monday. We'll keep things rolling throughout the rest of the week. Brian, thanks for joining me on a Friday. Everyone, we hope you have great weekends. I'll be at Acrisure Stadium on Saturday covering Pitt Syracuse with Noah Hiles. We'll be talking Pitt things there. So stay in touch with what the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette has to offer there. Also, Pitt basketball starts up Monday. It'll be a lot of stuff to talk about going into next week. So stay tuned with all of our sports stuff right here on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and on our YouTube channel. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. We're about to get there. You could be the 1,000th subscriber. So get on it. Let's go. We're trying to do our thing. We'll be back Monday with more right here on the North Shore Drive Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive Podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.